I'm JG Michael, and this is Parallax Views. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Galen, Matt, Gunnar, Mark, Simon, Alexander, Catherine, G, Tilo, Emilia, Jeremy, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Gareth, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Will, Chance, Chase, Dan, Big Bob, David H, Y. Kellerman, Sadeed 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey Parallax Views listeners, as always I want to remind you that if you support the work here I do at Parallax Views, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. With that out of the way, we have a previously unreleased conversation from late 2024 with returning guest Alex Gendler and Ryan Zickgraf, who wrote a piece in Jacobin entitled "Working Class Men Are Not Okay." And that's going to be the topic that we're dealing with, the plight of working class men and why the boys aren't all right, or maybe they are becoming alt-right. Okay, that was a bad joke. But anyways, Alex comes on the program having written a piece some years ago for the American Affairs Journal called "The New Superfluous Man," which dealt with the phenomena of incels. This is going to be a really interesting three-way conversation about men in America today. So with that being said, let's get right to it with Ryan Zickgraf and Alex Gendler. We've got a panel edition of Parallax Views, folks. Two guests, not just one. We have returning guest Alex Gendler, who has been on the show multiple times, and we're going to be talking a little bit about an article he wrote some years ago now called "The New Superfluous Men," which was in American Affairs. That was back in 2020, actually. And then also Ryan Zickgraf, who wrote a piece for Jacobin that caught my eye after I was turned on to it by Jason Miles of This Is Revolution Radio, entitled "Working Class Men Are Not Okay." So this is going to be the Boys Are Not All Right episode of Parallax Views. How are you guys doing, Alex and Ryan?
Well, I'm all right. Even if the men aren't, I'm doing okay today.
What about you, Alex?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, thanks for having me back. Always a pleasure.
Alex, let's start with you. Maybe you could give my listeners the skinny on how you ended up writing this piece in 2020, "The New Superfluous Men," which I think kind of dealt with the rise of incels, and also a documentary that was kind of taking the internet by storm at the time, Alex Lee Moyer's TFW, No GF.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I conceived of the article back in I want to say 2017, 2018. The discourse about incels had been going on for a while. And, I was afraid that by the time I got around to actually writing it in 2020, that by the time it came out, it wouldn't be relevant. No one would care about it anymore. Fortunately for me, and unfortunately for the world, I guess, the topic has only become more and more relevant over time.
The
But
sort
yeah,
of
I just
incel and men's rights stuff of 2020 almost feels quaint in comparison to like the Andrew Tate stuff today, but go on.
yeah. I mean, it's weird because in some ways this, let's say, problem or issue. I mean, what I argued in my piece was that on a kind of macro historical level, this is not a new issue. This is actually one of the oldest gender issues. Um, and what I guess what I was trying to get across is partly, and this extends beyond gender stuff. It's also relevant to economics and everything. It's is how much our perception of what's normal and what's the baseline and what a normal society should look like is shaped by this very very brief window of prosperous post-war America, um, which including stuff like a man could sustain a family and on a factory job, and that is just very much not normal in the course of human history. So that was like one of the big things I was trying to get across. Um, what I wasn't I would say what I wasn't prepared for, and we can talk about this later, is how much the internet obviously was a huge factor in the rise of, like, let's say, like incel ideology, this like men's rights, sort of men coming together on the internet to bond over resentment towards women, right? Um, what I wasn't prepared for was like the extent to which the that kind of ecosystem would both multiply and kind of metastasize into other sort of internet spaces and communities that hadn't really been founded on that. So, for example, it's just, and also how much that would actually just attach itself to one of the two major political parties and make that its brand. Because I think if you went back to, like, 2018, 2019, and you took Joe Rogan fans, Andrew Tate fans, people who read Richard Dawkins, Trump voters, even young evangelicals who follow some, like, mega church pastor. These people wouldn't see themselves as having much in common. And a good number of them wouldn't even see themselves as right leaning or conservative. They would not see themselves as like part of Trump's core audience. And really since the last election cycle, something has happened where all of these have kind of converged into one thing, and just are now self-consciously see themselves as part of the same movement. Ben Shapiro fans also, that's another one I would mention. Not only see themselves as part of the same thing, but are also openly, like, self-consciously identifying as right-wing, as Republicans, as anti-woke, anti-feminist, etc. And among all that, the resurgence of, like, how now it's cool to pretend to be a fundamentalist Christian. That's what's really, like, kind of throwing me for a loop.
Have you
It's not
followed
actually cool, but they think it is.
have
Right.
you followed it all? And then we'll go to Ryan. But either of you, have you heard of this like new? I mean, I guess it's Gen Z's version of some type of counterculture, but there's this new genre of music that's happened in the past few years that is kind of like Gen Z grunge that is being called incel core. You heard about this?
No.
Are you talking about that? I know there's that one band from, like, by like some 4chan guy. What is it? Negative
Ma
XP.
Negative XP, Scott Pilgrim versus the World ruined an entire generation of
Yeah,
women. And they're all it's weird because like all these like one man band, like incel core bands, they all do like sort of coalesce around a bunch of different issues, and it's all
yeah. Back in
very
my day, we used to call that black metal, but
right, right. Well, it's
uh,
all very like right coded. There's all these like references to Alex Jones and like conspiracy stuff on the right wing, and I mean it is sort of its own culture. They had a thing called like Virgin Fest a few years ago, and they were real big into that whole like Well, Christian fundamentalism is cool. They got the cops called on them actually at their little festival, and they were like, "We love cops." Apparently,
Oh, Jesus Christ. Where
it's
was
horrible.
that?
What's that?
Where did that happen? Where
I
did
don't
that
know
go?
where Virgin Fest happened. I was just reading about this stuff because I'm like, someone told me about it, and I'm like, is this real? And apparently they're trying to rebrand it as e-punk. But I'm like, I never expected this thing to become like a whole culture for like younger
Yeah.
people. I mean,
Hmm.
what do you think's driving that? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Ryan, because your article sort of gets into like where men are at right now, especially working class men.
Yeah, although I'd say that my article wasn't so much about like these subcultures and more about just like more of the atomized working class guy who tends to be very lonely and very isolated from family and friends and the culture in general, and tends to, work these gig jobs or poor paying jobs, and struggle with substance abuse. And yeah, so my article, yeah, it wasn't so much about like, online subcultures rather
No,
than
no,
just
no, I
like,
totally get that, but I think in some
right.
ways they may overlap, but yeah.
Yeah. You could say Ryan wrote about the base and I wrote about the superstructure. You want
There
to
you
be
go.
honest about it.
But you did a good amount of research for this piece talking about, just the studies that have been done by what was it? What was the association you covered? The American Institute for Boys and Men?
It's Richard Reeves' group. Yeah, I find a lot of his work pretty good because Reeves is kind of a moderate, liberal, basically, that sort of found a gap in that, yeah, that most of the concern around men tended to come from these more right-wing groups, and that there wasn't some sort of like sort of moderate voice that wasn't, necessarily anti-feminist saying, look, uh, a lot of men, especially working class men, are struggling. They have lack identity, they lack good jobs, they're having trouble in relationships, they're addicted to opioids, and so we should do something about that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about like the gender pay gap? Because I know you cover that in the article.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the gender pay gap is that, class is a big part of this, obviously, right? And when it comes to like working class men and women, men have still have like a slight advantage, especially in certain states, in certain like rural and suburban areas. But the big divide is education. Obviously, college educated men and women make more, but what's happened is that in certain parts of America, with college educated women actually make more than anyone. Um, I found this study recently that there's 22 cities in America where college educated women actually make more than college educated men. So if you look at the divide between, say, college educated women and college or non-college educated men, there's a massive, massive gap. Um, and so, like, I think a lot of us have had the assumptions about the gender pay gap, and some of that is still true, but some of this recent data, I think a lot of people are having trouble responding to the fact that, you know for one, there's a big education gap in that now women make up 60% of college graduates. And because college graduates do better, the working class is now more male than ever. And when I say working class, I'm using sort of the non-college educated metric, not using, like a Marx uh, metric. Um, yeah, and a lot of these jobs that men have are not just tend to be low paying, but also gig work. they tend to have jobs that don't last. Like the guy that I wrote about in my piece, I kind of lead my piece off with. Um, he's a guy that um, yeah, has like a basically 11th grade education. Um, but he's had maybe 7 jobs in the last 10 years, and um, that's part of the reason why he hasn't had like stable income, but also a sort of a lack of identity. Like he doesn't have coworkers that he, builds these friendships with. And I think that like for a lot of men, they identify with their jobs. And when you have these like really shitty, low paid jobs that don't stick around, you just feel like untethered from the world.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could add to that, one of like my article was a bit older and it drew, but I think this is a trend that's been going on for a while. One of the kind of resources I relied on a lot was Hannah Rosen's book, The End of Men,
Being
which I
a
think,
man, yeah.
yeah, which I think was from like 2015. And one other thing, besides looking at the snapshot, sort of, like, and yeah, the fact that in even cities like, yeah, like New York, where I am, apparently college age, I just looked this up, what you were talking about, Ryan, and you're right. Like, yeah, even in New York and DC, college educated women are earning more than men. The other thing is like about it, but rather than instead of just looking at a snapshot, you can look at like prospects and future. And even in sort of non-college educated, like working class work, the fastest growing sectors are overwhelmingly female. Nursing, just various types of service work. This is, and of course, this was part of like the pitch of both Biden and Trump, where we're going to bring back factory jobs, which everyone knows means male jobs. Uh, but yeah, it's generally even for what we would call unskilled labor, or at least labor that doesn't require a college degree. Um, that is overwhelmingly like the future looks female for that as well. And there's both. It's just that pure brawn is no longer necessary for a lot of work, and the kinds of qualities that are associated with women more than men actually make them also better positioned for non-college degree work. So for example, being like unthreatening and approachable, or showing up sober, those are like, this is just like the kind of the socialization and the cultural perception.
Yeah,
The
I was gonna say
yeah,
I reference Pierre Bourdieu a lot, the sociologist. He's been a big influence on me, but he wrote about some of this in his book, The Masculine Domination. And if you read that book and then read some other works of sociology, there's a lot of research that has gone into like how women, due to their socialization, can actually do better in a neoliberal society, and especially in a college setting. Um, there's like multiple reasons for this, but like a lot of it has to do with just socialization, and men are socialized in a different way where they're not necessarily equipped to really succeed as well in a neoliberal society. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, but go on. I just wanted to add that.
no, yeah, I was kind of interrupting Ryan, so yeah, back
Yeah.
to you guys.
Well, yeah, even it's sort of an underrated factor, but even the decline of organized labor. Um, I've profiled some union workers, and one thing that really sticks to me is like how much their the identity actually goes in with not only their job but also their union. They tend to hang out, they tend to drink together,
Yeah,
you
well,
see the
we've seen that.
jackets.
I was going to say we've seen that like just precipitous decline, even in like not just unions, but like civic institutions, civic
Yes.
clubs since the 1960s, and that's also leading to a lot of these issues related to atomization.
Oh, totally. Yeah, men have been worse off from like the decline of socialization that's happened over the last few decades. And the the workplace tended to be sort of like the last domain for socialization for a lot of men because they would work long hours. And then, meanwhile, like people, men and women have gone to church less, they're involved less in the community. I've seen statistics about how like, um, less gym membership, less Boy Scouts, there's just less of this altogether. But men are the less social creatures, and so they have tended to be more harmed by this like collapse of socialization. They're not even going to bars anymore. Well, I mean, they're still going to bars, but um, I was just reading recently about how people are drinking a lot, but there's been the rise of drinking alone or in your house, which
Yeah.
it's not great.
I mean, that's, yeah, I'm sure the pandemic also had a lot to do with that. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's like, this is partly qualitative and partly quantitative, but, just like it's true. Like, I mean, anecdotally, looking among my friends, like, even people I know, like, and even the older generation, it's often true that once men did get married, they would usually rely on their wife to set up social to maintain social ties and be like, okay, we're going to these people's house for a dinner party, etc. It's just something that like it seems men are poorly equipped to handle on their own by the kind of socialization that we currently have.
I was gonna say, I mean, hopefully this isn't too off topic, but I always found it weird that I feel like the left, as on the whole, or like the I guess the media pundits of what we call the left in America, haven't really covered this issue. At least it doesn't feel like they've covered it enough. I mean, it used to be that like people like Susan Faludi would write about this. I thought her book, Stiff, The Betrayal of the American Man from 1999 is like was critical reading when it came to this stuff. But I think there's been less and less of that over the years. And now it's like there's a renewed discussion about, well, are the boys all right? It just seems like I'm surprised that some people have been blindsided by the right wing shift of young men. What do you guys think, though?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely the literature on this stuff is out there, and I drew on a lot of it for my essay, which honestly, like the kind of reception that my article got as like, oh, this is something new, no one has been saying this. I was grateful for it and appreciative of it, but it also was like, I mean, it's been there.
That's
Honestly,
why I mentioned the Faludi book because
yeah.
that came out in '99. It's like
Right, and
people were
before that,
talking about
there
this.
was, I believe it was "The Hazards of Being Male" by Herb Goldberg, and that came out in 1976. And that is actually when the well, I think it was like Robert Bly and the men's movement, not to be confused with the men's rights movement, the kind of like feminist offshoot of like, oh, we need to teach men to be more sensitive, and they're also harmed by patriarchy, like that. Yeah, that all goes back to the 70s, and it just kind of didn't really survive in the discourse until recently, I suppose.
Ryan, do you
Yeah,
want
I
to talk
think.
about the? Well, go on, go on. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say that I think there's part of the reluctance is that on the left or among liberals is that um I think there's a lot of men that tend to agree with a lot of feminist critiques of the patriarchy and men having disproportionate power. Obviously, Trump just got elected, and he's we're what 45 out of 45 with male presidents, and there's been an emphasis, especially since Trump was first elected, on like, oh, we have an epidemic of toxic masculinity, right? And it was almost like toxic got put in front of masculinity almost reflexively. But like, there wasn't talk about like there wasn't enough discussion about what would a positive portrayal of masculinity be like, except for like say recently when some of these commentators were looking at Tim Walz and Doug the second gentleman, what first gentleman, something like that, about how he was like a new ideal for liberal men to embody. But beyond that, there just like hasn't been not only not a healthy discussion about like masculinity on the left or men on the left, but also people are just afraid to even bring it up.
Well, why do you think that is? I mean, do you think it's just the agreeing with feminists, or like what's causing that?
I mean, I think our the way that like, and the way that internet sort of left and liberal discourse is shaped, and how that bleeds into general discourse. There is always like the idea of a zero sum game. And the idea is like, oh, you're feeling sorry for the poor men, oh, boo-hoo, like the men, right there. And
I think there's also this like tendency for some people to lump like the richest men in with like working class men in a way that is just it's always bothered me and just seems very icky.
well, yeah, the lack of class analysis is obviously kind of a given in liberal and kind of left liberal discourse. But it's tricky even if you do try to do class analysis, because there's endless arguments about even on the self-identified socialist left of like, how do we define the working class? Are baristas working class? Et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, there is like this is kind of what I was trying to do with my article of looking at how this functions as it's not just that like you have these like groups you can slice up and then they're all independently kind of competing for some slice of the pie, like especially when it comes to gender, because you know this is a this is like a symbiotic relationship. There is no idea of men without an idea of women, and vice versa. And the two kind of co-evolve, and what gender roles are, and how what like the role of women in society has a direct relation to what the role of men in society is. Right? You can't compare it the way that people do. Say like races, like, oh, like the black community and like the Hispanic community or whatever, because men and women are not existing as like separate communities, right, or separate cultures. And yeah, what I was trying to do was kind of trace how this was related and how it kind of developed as an overall mechanism of civilization and culture
Yeah,
throughout.
not just America, which I find really interesting about your piece is like you're pointing to like South Sudan, you're pointing towards the rise of ISIS, you're looking at what's happening in East Germany and India and saying, this is not just an American issue.
Yeah, and we've seen that bear out. I mean, the kind of that brand of sort of anti-liberal. I would not. I maybe hesitate to call it far right, but like it, at least it's seen as that. Yeah, the kind of like anti-liberal, directly like appealing to men, kind of like quasi-authoritarian sort of thing that's been winning in more and more countries. And since I wrote that piece, yeah, you had that South Korean election where the guy really literally ran on like an anti-feminist platform and won. And there's many cases of that kind of thing around the world.
Ryan, I,
What
I want to get your commentary. I don't know if you want to comment on that or
Well, one
mhm.
thing I was going to say, and I don't necessarily have the data in front of me to really speak on this like in very specific terms, but what I see in a way is that men are super stratified, where you have, your Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and a lot. If you look at the list of the top, 1,000 richest people, it's almost all going to be men, and a lot of CEOs and a lot of big executives, finance, whatever, tech. It's going to be a lot of men. And on the other hand, you have a lot of men that are homeless. I could go down the street and I go down to the homeless shelters. And I can tell you that it's dominated by men. Um, But what I find interesting is that, especially in big cities, where deindustrialized cities is, there's this sort of like layer of tend to be women that have better employment than a lot of men in the same class. And I mean, it's hard for me to like talk about this in certain circles, but like, so I make less than my wife, and we move for her job. That is the case in a lot of my friends, where like the man has the lower job, the lower paying job, and is often doing the childcare, and while the wife has like the good stable job. Um, that creates, I think, some tension, and some of it is like the idea of traditional masculine roles, but nobody is really talking about the social effects of the fact that um that a lot of work is still gendered, but like there's this a liberal conception of just like it's the patriarchy, right? Which again it is as far as like a lot of the ruling class, but you have a lot of the PMC world, which is highly female. It's just
Right,
true.
the professional managerial class. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just cutting in to say, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to be clear. Like, I'm not like against a lot of the like I said, I mentioned Susan Faludi. I value the work of a lot of feminists, but I just feel like there's this like ignoring of an issue when it comes to like how liberals talk about where men are at right now. And it's very bizarre to me that it's taken so long for people to get this. I mean, in your article, Ryan, you talk about um, the issue of deaths of despair and just the amount of men that are just, twice as likely to die at like work now. It's really crazy, and it's not something that's really talked about.
Yeah, and um, it some of it's difficult because you have sort of an intermingling of a bunch of different issues at once. So you can't point to one single thing with men's issues. Like some of it is economic, some of it was deindustrialization and globalization, some of it is the change in technology and in just the way that we communicate, and the way that the nature of work has changed to be soon more AI controlled. There's just not one. There's just not. Oh, and then the rise of not only opioids but now like with fentanyl. Um, so there's a complex crises all at once, and so I think in one sense that it's difficult to tackle and just be like, okay, here is the agenda that we need to just like make men better. There's no magic bullet.
Um, yeah, and because like it is, as I kind of hinted towards the end of my article, like there may not actually be like a solution under capitalism, right? Because sort of in a grand historical sense, I guess, masculinity and what the role of men and has been in like complex civilization is like this kind of brute force expansion, right? And then, like military colonization, extraction, right? Like, and
They're expendables that are sent off to fight the war.
yeah, yeah, they're expendables to that expendables that whose role is to expand the sort of sphere of the civilization economy that's functioning. And so I guess the question is, okay, what happens when you hit a wall? What happens when there's no more like there's no frontiers left to expand, and now you're now there's just the consolidation. And yeah, and then what do you do with the men then? And no one's really come up with an answer to that.
Yeah, it used to be you could Send him to America or Australia or,
Right.
you know, go into this mine here.
Do you want to talk more, Ryan, about the impacts on, I guess, working class men? Like, I mean, they're marrying less, having fewer kids, more isolated, don't have as many close friends. How important do you think it is for people to start recognizing those things? I mean, they're dying younger too, I should mention.
Yeah, I mean it's a new thing in American history that um, for 200 some years, the age at which people died kept increasing. Well, that's changed and in the last decade or two, and a lot of that is this group of men that are dying unnecessarily, and a lot of it, some of it is like you say self-inflicted because alcohol abuse, substance abuse, um, but that is intertwined with the sort of the death of the social. um it's easier for men to like kind of like fall through the gaps a bit when they're not part of a community, and online is just not the same. And with what I see, like, I think about my brother. Like I've written about my brother a few times, and I mean, I know in that article I actually wrote about his friend, but he's middle aged. He has about a ninth grade education, and he's had a lot of the same struggles, with work. He's a maintenance man at a high school, but I mean, he showed up, when there's fire alarms and when there's like toilets that need fixed, he's on call and he works his ass off. And he's talked his way up to $12 an hour. And it's not very much. And it's just also like he doesn't have the status, right? Like when he says he's like a maintenance man, he kind of gets spit on or, ignored. Um, he doesn't have great benefits. I think does not have dental insurance. He fell off a ladder at work a couple years ago and got like, the minimum to fix it, but didn't get any sort of physical therapy or anything like that. And so he doesn't have much of a social life. He still hangs out. He never left town. He hangs out with some of his high school friends, but he spends a lot of his days just like watching TV, drinking. He wasn't very political, but he has become more of a Trump guy. He's never voted, and he still didn't vote this time. But it's it is like a sort of identity to have when there is none around him. Like he doesn't feel connected to really anything else, and so that's one thing that MAGA has is just sort of like it's almost like a fandom. It's like a man fandom.
Yeah,
Um,
that's exactly that's exactly
And it's
right.
it's now we're seeing it's not really just limited in the way that maybe some people thought just to like white men. I mean, we've seen the black male vote steadily turn a little bit. The Latino vote is getting talked, Latino male vote. So it's not just like people say, "Oh, you're just talking about white men." I mean, we're not really.
These
So
people, these people who say this are revealing that they have literally never spent time around any non-white men, because like you would not be surprised. Like, yeah, go on.
no, I think that's a fair point.
yeah. Um, yeah, what's interesting is when I was living in Atlanta and I was working in Atlanta when Trump got arrested, and I had to do his famous booking photo. The media didn't really like to talk about this, but there were not many protesters, but there were there were a good amount of black men that were cheering on Donald as as a gangsta or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, he had like a lot of working class, inner city black men that thought he was kind of cool for that.
Right. Well, that's part of the issue is like, as you point out, Ryan, in the article, I mean, Trump likes to pander to working men. I mean, he brought in what's Sean from the Teamsters union at the RNC, but his policies disproportionately benefit the rich. And then on the other hand, you have the Democratic Party with Harris that I really felt like I agreed with your article a lot on the idea that she was really backing away from the sort of positive aspects of Bidenomics.
Yeah, and I mean, to be frank, she was kind of pandering to women. I went to one of her rallies here, and one thing that struck me, and I was telling my wife about this, the playlist they're playing like all throughout between speakers, it was all like a millennial women, like it was like Katy Perry, like all female Rihanna, Charlie XCX. It seemed like that they were intentionally trying to cultivate like a female millennial audience. So I think that like while yeah, like the MAGA movement has been trying to intentionally like cultivate a male audience, I think in some ways the Democrats have been trying to do that with college educated women too. And I don't
Yeah.
think we can really avoid that.
Yeah, and you saw this in the run up to the well, basically like when once early voting started, and you could see the beginnings of panic because the polls were so close. And then the last thing that all the liberal media hung their hopes on was that, oh well, men are lazy and women turn out to vote more than men, and all the women are going to vote for Kamala. So
And a
the
lot of white
polls,
women ended up voting for Trump.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there was even one particular New York Times article. I talked to a few people, and then I talked to like one dude who was like leading a vote for Trump, and it was like in that detached like New York Times, but kind of condescending way. It's like, oh, he said he was gonna early vote for Trump, but then he said he overslept, and it was kind of implying that like, oh, don't worry, like all the Trump voting men are gonna just are like they're gonna fuck it up somehow, and yeah, it turns out unfortunately that was not the case.
On election day, I got a haircut, and I never talked to about politics with the guy that cuts my hair, but I was just curious. So I asked him, and I live in kind of a purplish area. I mean, I'm in central Pennsylvania, and it's a small city, but I live like downtown. It's a very blue neighborhood and kind of purplish around, but also deep red around. Anyway, I found it fascinating that when I asked him about politics, he was afraid to say. And I was kind of like, dude, I'm not, here to judge you. And he was like, yeah, I'm kind of more of a Trump guy. Um, but he works and lives in this blue neighborhood. And so he did not want to advertise that. And he didn't want to tell anybody. But so I think he just like quietly voted for Trump. And so I think that there's like a good amount of people that are, of people and men that are doing that. And probably the roles are reversed if you're, living in the country, in a red area. So, part of it is this gender dynamics, but also like the city to suburb to exurb dynamic too as well.
Do you mind so I want to go back to what you were saying earlier about like couples where the woman is like the primary bread earner because like to me I wouldn't find that to be a big deal. I've been in relationships with women who are making more money than me. However, I think there is this thing where even if you're okay with that, the society around you can end up in various ways punishing you for that or looking down on you for that. Is that sort of what you were trying to talk about or
Yeah. Um, it's 2024 and things have changed a lot, but I will say that there is this sort of like, you know, tradition of male breadwinners, and that doesn't always just isn't just vanquished, right? And I think what's hard to talk about sometimes is like there has been a loss of status for men, and sometimes the reaction is to that. It isn't just that they're making less, but they also have a loss of social status in many cases. Um, and there's just times in my life where, so another thing is I took my wife's last name when we got married, and I get comments on that by both men and women that think that's really weird. And so like the old society still um there's still remnants of the old traditionalism.
There's still like remnants that will stigmatize
Yeah.
difference. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And not all of that's bad, but it does make that harder for me to navigate sometimes. Um but most of the men that I know that are in that situation where their wives or partners make more than them, have higher status jobs. Most of them are um, like college educated and are feminists and aren't like they're not going on men's rights forums and they're not, big MAGA people. But I will just say that in general, there is a little bit of maybe unease below the surface about that.
What did you guys think of how the Harris campaign was trying to talk about masculinity in relation to like the campaign ads about Tim
The
Walz? Because to
white dudes
me,
for Kamala Harris. That's
what's
the
that?
white dudes for Kamala
Yeah,
Harris.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or just the videos where the men were like, "I'm a man because I'm not afraid of my wife." It felt like a very superficial like way to talk about like, well, what's the role of like a positive masculinity? But it felt so superficial in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I mean, it was super condescending. It was like, yeah, it was like the whole, like, it was kind of like it had the vibe of like the wife in like a laundry detergent commercial being like, my husband, he doesn't really know how to do anything. But, fortunately, product makes it easy. It's like, it was like that kind of vibe.
Yeah, it's funny that to think about like these men being like tokenized and sort of like used as a political chip, but that's what it felt like sometimes with like Tim Walz. It's like they wanted to attract, they knew that they were losing with men, and so it seemed like that part of the calculation was we have this guy who has held a gun before and knows how to change a tire. And I mean, the thing is like Tim Walz is a lot of his politics and policies were pretty good if you look at his record in Minnesota, but that was like so downplayed. I mean, I had some hope when he first got picked that some of his policies would be part of the equation, but it just seems like that he was just dragged around to be like, hey, he's kind of a cool dad, masculine guy, so yeah, vote Harris.
No, no, I think you nailed it in a way there where like, you have the ads where like a dude is on a ranch with a cowboy hat being like, I'm voting for Kamala Harris because I'm a man. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, this is the most superficial understanding of what it means to be a man. Yeah, there was something off-putting to me about it.
Well, it was also, I mean, it was funny in a way, in a postmodern way, to see white men, which for a long time that's like the default human being, right, in media. They suddenly, to see them getting the kind of tokenized minority treatment that
Yeah.
pretty much like every other demographic has gotten. So it was interesting in that sense, but yeah, clearly not effective.
I mean, some of the ads I saw had like it wasn't just white men, but it just felt like a really superficial like I think what I find annoying is people will tell me, well, we need to envision a new masculinity for men that's positive. I'm like, well, you can say that, but what does that mean? And like, how do you get there? And it just seems like people stop at like platitudes, And I feel like there hasn't really been a lot of thought about this idea of like, well, if there's a toxic masculinity, what's
Yeah.
the positive vision for it? People want to give lip service to their needing to be a positive vision for masculinity, but really they stop at that
I
and
mean,
really go no further.
I
Mhm.
mean, I'll like venture sort of an answer that I'm not like
It's
I
probably
don't
going to be very nihilistic, maybe, right?
have. I mean, a bit, yeah. Well, because the thing is, like, part of the answer, I think part of the problem lies in the framing of the question in general. Because I don't. It may not be. The question should be, well, why do you need to? form your identity around being a man in the first place. And there might actually not be a fully non-toxic way to do that, because the thing is, like, what if people are coming together around the idea of being men? What are they coming around together around? Versus, like, coming together around any other possible thing you could come together around. You know, whether it's demographic or social, or fandom or occupation or anything. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it's analogous to the idea of, like, there's a question that, like, like, where right wingers and racists always ask, well, if it's okay for, like, there to be like a black community association, why can't there be a white community association, right? And, like, we know why. We actually often, I think leftists and liberals often have trouble answering that question, but it's because there's something about the kind of the default category against which other categories have been defined, and then to try to kind of reclaim that as its own positive identity may kind of just be a doomed project.
Ryan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like certain ways that men are a victim of their own success, in that, like, we built this society and we built, like, this technology and these tools to make life easier, and and these laws and everything, and a lot of the things that we used to do, as far as, like, we built things, we created cities and sewer systems and all this stuff, that has mostly gone away. Now, I believe that, one policy thing that we should do is to build a new, like, a new deal that isn't just green, but also, I don't know, gritty gray, um, where we need to have jobs where we're building things again. And something I brought up in the This is Revolution interview was that, like, there's lead pipes everywhere, especially in northern cities. And in fact, I just got a notification that they want to inspect my pipes because of all this lead problems. Well, we could be employing a ton of men to do that kind of thing, but there's just not the political will for it. Like, Biden had the infrastructure bill, and I think some of that has come, but a lot of that's going to be over the next 10 years. But we should be doing 10 times more of that. There needs to be more things for men to do that have, like, a purpose. Like, I have an
I
unpopular.
think that's an important thing, because even like Francis Fukuyama in his last book, I think it was called like Identity or Dignity or something. He was saying that, like, people don't just want to be, we're not just like rational economic actors the way he used to think. He said that, like, people actually want a sense of dignity and feeling like they're contributing to their communities. So I think what you're saying there plays into that.
Yeah, and what do we have left often is the market. That is how we tend to identify ourselves and in as consumers, and it's just under capitalism, it's an unsatisfying life. I mean, you remember all the movies that, especially during the 90s, once, like, the economy was changing and a lot more people were working desk jobs, and then you have, like, the Fight Club and Office Space, and you had all these jobs where it was like, yeah, I had a secure job, but it's really boring and
The
meaningless.
bullshit jobs.
Bullshit jobs, as David Graeber once wrote.
Right. And
Yeah.
now the, like, leftist Zoomers are like deriding that and being like, "Oh, you had it so bad. You had a stable job. You guys were so unhappy." But yeah, well, right. What was your you started saying you have an unpopular theory? I wanted to.
Oh, I think there should be a year of service, that young people have to do. Um, Not necessarily military, but I think, I kind of did something the equivalent of it, and I just think that there's a lot of young people in general. I mean, with the doomers and the young men that just feel like no purpose. Society is declining, and so I think some of that doomerism, and some of that like nihilism is from like a lack of socialization and purpose.
You know what? I have
So
to say I don't disagree with that. I've often said to people, I think there needs to be a renewal of the idea of basically civic duty in society. And
yeah.
I like that upsets people because they're like, well, I don't want to be told what to do, but I don't disagree with you, to be honest.
No, I mean, I think that's a good idea. A lot of countries have something equivalent. I mean, even like in the very atrophied form, like the gap year that a lot of European countries have is sort of there's an idea that you at least you go to travel, you do something that like actually gives you a sense of the world before you just yeah.
Yeah,
Honestly,
my
yeah, I mean, like, personally, the like one of the best decisions I ever made, and I did this belatedly, like in my 20s, but like, and obviously not everyone has the opportunity to do this, but this is kind of part of the problem. Like I went backpacking in Europe for a while during a period when I was like extremely depressed and kind of nihilistic, and that was like probably the single best like decision that I made. And honestly, like, yeah, either a civil service thing or but and also because part of what military service and non-wartime did for like generations of men was like, yeah, it's kind of morbid, but like, well, yeah, you're getting to see a world outside of your freaking hometown, and for a lot of guys that was the first time they had been outside their hometown. And
yeah.
yeah, we could probably do a version of that that doesn't involve holding a gun and killing people. And yeah, just give every high school graduate like, I don't know, like uh, a round trip ticket for spaced like 3 months apart, and like, I don't know, like 1,000 in spending money, and be like, okay, we're just getting dropped off in this place, and find your own accommodation, figure out how to talk to people, and yeah.
Yeah, and you talked about the post-war period, but like, what did a lot of those veterans do when they came back? Well, they built like VFWs and they built a lot of social clubs and they were involved civically in America. And yeah, those things are dying and there's nothing much to replace that. And so it's a lot of guys that use the internet and gaming and these podcasts as sort of a unsatisfying substitute
Yeah.
for that old culture.
Yeah, well, since you mentioned that, I guess I can do a little plug. I've been involved with this new org that is trying not to be a typical leftist org. If you guys, I know probably JG, some of your fans know the Antifada. Yeah, Sean and Andy from the Antifada kind of helped start it, but yeah, it's called the Independent Labor Club, and it's basically, it's not trying to be a DSA type thing. It's not trying to be a political party, but we are kind of sort of trying to build the foundations for actually, yeah, a long-term project of reviving this kind of like working class civil society, like VFW hall, bowling nights, things like that. So yeah, we've been just hosting a few events and kind of getting people together, but we've had a lot of interest so far. So I'll drop that out there. Yeah, ILC Labor. What's our website? ILCLabor.com. Find us on Instagram, Independent Labor Club. Right now, it's Independent Labor Club of NYC. You've got some other chapters, but yeah. So I think that's really the only way forward for like what we call the left, or any kind of prospect of socialism, is we have to really rebuild, and for men, right, and not only men, we have to rebuild that kind of civil society from the ground up, and that could take like decades, but that's where we're at.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's
we'll
awesome.
go on, Ryan.
Oh, I just want to say that's awesome. Like, if you're familiar with, I'm friends with Dina Costella, who has written a lot about the social part of socialism, and yeah, that's a lot of his line again, that you can't have socialism without the social. And so I think that that's a paramount issue for men that we have to rebuild society, I think, over the medium to long term to really see a big change in this country.
Yeah.
It's not going to come from the either political party.
No.
So in closing, I guess Do you just want to give your final thoughts and I'll give my final thoughts? We could just bounce it off each other. You want to start, Alex, or
I'll I'll throw it over to Ryan. Yeah. Well,
Final thoughts. I think um, maybe the upside of this current moment of the sort of gendering of politics or the perception of, I mean, some of it I think is perception, but also some of it is true that there's been a more of a gendering politics. And this issue has gotten more awareness. I mean, we're sitting here talking about it, but a lot of people in the media are talking about it right now. And I think that that opens up more possibility for some changes, some positive changes. I also believe that it could we could have some negative changes where
I mean,
so, men or groups of
I'm not looking forward to
yeah
like liberal Joe Rogan and whatever that idea is.
yes
yeah.
yeah or just to like a redo of 2016 where you'll have sort of the panics around toxic masculinity and I don't know, rape culture, like where men will get blamed for Trump, and so then we'll play this game further. But my hope is that the recognition of this, and that that there's more stories coming out, and like Richard Reeves is getting more of a platform these days, that will have some healthy dialogue rather than the just sort of it's men's fault, it's women's fault, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the what is it? The four Fs movement or something, like the whole like attempted like liberal lysistrata. Like yeah, I mean this is all just like yeah, so these like symbolic politics that only serve to like kind of signal identity and entrench people further. Um, I guess like yeah, I mean final thoughts would be I guess kind of like what I said before. I think like I don't think there's a necessarily a kind of a positive project of like, oh, we need to figure out a non-toxic masculinity to like counterpose to the toxic masculinity. We need to figure out some kind of left-wing version or liberal version of masculinity, because I think kind of it's more the answer of like just like people could have other identities, like how I mean, and honestly, like as like yeah, I don't often go around my daily life like consciously thinking of myself as a man and being like as a man, and right, it's just like it's there, but you can have other things that you're interested in and that you build
You
your
can have
identity.
other things in your life other than thinking
Yeah,
like that you have to engage in mewing now if you're 14 to make your jaw more manly.
yeah,
I mean,
right,
that is something like I don't want to understate this, but like it, the thing that bothers me about all of this is like I do think there is a problem with like I know way too many young men that like look up to like Andrew Tate style figures, and I just it's not it's not even like a political thing. It's just like I'm like looking at Andrew Tate and I'm like, this dude is just some debased pimp. And it's like I just like it I mean, even I was telling Ryan before we started, even this whole like trad wife thing I think see now amongst certain young women. I'm like, these women are talking about like, I wish I could like work on a farm and have 3 kids and just have my husband do the work and I'm barefoot and pregnant. And I'm like, well, no, what you want to be is an aristocrat. You don't actually
yeah,
want to be like a working class woman that had Irish triplets. Like it's all based in you get this in your article, I think, and I want to talk about this briefly with you, Alex, is like I think a lot of men and increasingly young women have this vision of a traditional past, quote unquote, that actually has never existed for most people.
yeah. It's exactly everyone's brain is just like poisoned by media. People literally like think medieval life was like whatever whatever fantasy game they played, um, and yeah, it's I think that's also like that's really like kind of the big one of the bigger stories here of just like the kind of like hyper mediated society that gives rise to these like identities that are not actually built around like um, anything real like this. Like the manosphere is not really built even around like actually existing masculinity, if that makes sense. It's like this virtual imagined
It's like an
masculinity.
alternate reality game.
Well, yeah, it's like everything is so untethered from the physical world and the actually existing world that we seek out models from the past to just a lot of the trad stuff is more of an aesthetic than anything. And it wasn't like my parents were like, oh, we're trads, you just were in a certain place in time, and you just sort of were what you were. And there's a lot of self-consciousness that comes with existing in 2024. And I think some people, part of it may be rebellion to the liberal culture, are looking for aesthetic new subcultures to parade around. It's content.
Yeah, and we know what happens when aesthetics becomes politics, right? Where's that quote from? Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I want to thank both of you again for coming on Parallax Views. How can my listeners keep up with your work, Ryan, and then Alex?
I'm on X, Twitter, whatever. Ryan Zickgraf. I write for Jacobin. I'm a columnist at Compact, and if you're in Central Pennsylvania, come to my trivia every Thursday night.
Yeah, I'm sort of not really regularly writing anywhere, but you'll find me here and there occasionally. You can see like kind of all my work on my portfolio site, alexgendler.com. I'm on Twitter, but not really active that much. But you can find me. It's Achilles Elbow is the handle.
We need to get you to go back to writing those music articles. I want you to write a dissection of incel core.
I could do that. I am actually working on. I'm working on something for the Point magazine right now. It's going to be. You'll see it when it comes out. It's sort of about like tech ideology and kind of. Yeah, you'll see it when it comes out. It should be
the
out.
episode we did on Aztec Nazi black metal that you wrote about and did reporting on is like one of my most popular episodes.
Oh wow. Good to know that.
Well, thank both of you. Thanks again, guys, for coming on Parallax Views.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Ryan Zickgraf and Alex Gendler. As always, if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.